Welcome to the REI Foundation Podcast, where we cover all the steps and strategies to make your real estate dreams a reality. Now your hosts, Jason and Peely.
Welcome, everybody, to the REI Foundation podcast with Jason and Peely. We are sitting here today with Darrin Gross. Thank you so much, Darrin, for coming on this podcast.
Thank you for having me. Excited to talk to you guys today.
So Darrin, I had the pleasure of speaking with you a little bit earlier, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about your background, who you are, basically what you're about, what you've been doing over the years, and then we can catch up a little bit about what you're doing now.
You got it. So you said the J and the Darrin and Gross, just to get that straight. My friends call me Darrin. J is the first name. John is the first name, and created a lot of confusion since birth, and the TSA continues to make me very well aware of that. But anyway, so my friends call me Darrin. But anyway, so I'm an insurance broker by day, and I've been doing that since it was right about, I guess, 1989, a long time ago. And yeah. And one of the things that happened, in the beginning, I was basically just kind of hunting with a vacuum cleaner to basically, survival. If I could, sell a policy, it didn't matter what it was, kind of thing. And along the way, I ran into some real estate investors. And what was really cool about that was that, they'd call me up and I'd go out and take pictures and put some coverage on their building and stuff. And then they'd call me back in a few weeks later and say, hey, we got another one. I was going like, wow, another one. And, pretty soon I started asking questions about, well, how does this work? I mean, are you making money? And they were showing me, yeah, we're making money. And so anyway, I was always kind of fascinated. And I think, it's funny, I was thinking about this, knowing we're going to be doing this. I don't know if you've ever been invited to any kind of multi-level marketing deal, whether it's like Amway or, there's all sorts of different ones out there. But I remember always being invited to these things. And I was like, there's this appeal about making money without doing anything kind of thing. And people think that, you can just make money in your sleep kind of thing. And it was always like this appeal. And it just, to me, it never did make sense. It just always had kind of like a really weird, shady, like, ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's got to be some back handshake kind of thing going on.
There must be something wrong with it. Yeah. It can't work. No way.
Yeah. And so what appealed to me about real estate was it was real. It was like people had a need for housing. And people grow, people live in houses, they raise families in houses. They have a need for it. It's not some sort of you buy a house and then you get your downline and all this kind of stuff. And
it's not makeup. It's not a sports drink.
Yeah. And I'm not here to insult anybody or suggest it can't be done, because there's plenty of people that have made a lot of money, but it just never did appeal to me. And I was always just kind of, I don't know. It seemed like networking is a lot of what you do in insurance. I mean, it's not exactly a sexy topic, but in order to create customers, people have to know you, And so a lot of what I was doing early in my career was just networking. And so between the customers that were doing real estate and meeting some lenders and some brokers and just kind of being entrenched in that marketplace, it led to one of my customers. I was talking to him in a driveway and I said, God, I got to get into this. And he goes, you want to get in? I'll sell you this one. And I was like, me, really, and he was a guy that was buying stuff that was just, non-conforming. It was like probably stuff like you moved, Jason, with trees growing out of the chimney, kind of just weird stuff that was just not appealing, but it was always like an owner finance kind of thing. So anyway, he hooked me up. I got my first property and started telling other people about what I was doing. And lo and behold, I had a contractor or customer that said, I need to get into that. And I was going like, you want in? I got a property for you, And so literally like in 7 months, I flipped a house. It wasn't called flipping at the time. It was basically, I bought it, did a little fix up and sold it. And I was hooked because in literally 7 months, I made almost what I made in a year selling insurance.
Wow.
And basically
Boom.
I was going like, and that's all I had to do, And so gone was all the fear that I had before about getting into it, and I was scared to death with the first property. I mean, it was an absolute turd. It was just rough, and it was scary, and I was scared to death that the tenants were going to like come knock on my door, and it just. So, but I learned a lot of lessons. I mean, and basically, like I said, I learned about money and, got into it. So we sold that, learned about taxes too, because the short-term thing. And then, had I known more about it then, probably would have done the 1031 exchange, but it all worked out. I mean, it was definitely a good learning lesson. So long story long, I'll try and keep it short. We have since, my wife and I, we've got 6 single family houses here in the area where we live. And it was not until the 5th one that we actually saw cash flow.
Okay.
Because everything we were buying was basically, I kind of was excited to do my taxes because, based on the losses from a single family. I mean, single families just really don't cash flow. At least, if you're in a market where there's a lot of building going on, and at the time there was a lot of the lending laws or lending requirements were very loose. The reason why we had the problem we did in 07, 08. So there was a lot of new supply, and you could basically rent it for what you could, what your costs were. It wasn't like there was nothing left over kind of thing.
Yes.
So we did the 4, and along the way, one of my customers was a care provider, had he had like a group home thing. And I got talking to somebody about that. And there was this program I got in and actually was able to build one and got a grant for like a third of the project cost. And all of a sudden I had a brand new house. I had a tenant that was paying, like 3 times whatever the going rent was. And I was seeing actually monthly cash flow. And so I was, hold on a second. Can you still see me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. It's my calendar. There you are. Okay. My calendar jumped up and I was like,
we're back.
Yeah. There we go. Okay. So anyway, I started in cash flow, and the cash flow was the first time I'd actually seen it, and it was significant. And I was going, holy moly. I mean, you can make money at this, and
what? Money?
Yeah. I don't have to wait till, go do taxes or something like that. And, so that kind of, over time, a couple of years went by and we accumulated quite a bit of cash on the deal. And there was another opportunity very similar. In fact, the tenant that I had was operating a second home and it was for sale. And almost made the biggest mistake of my life because the seller was trying to sell it to me on contract. And lo and behold, he had a lien against it and we couldn't get a clean title. And he was still trying to get me to do it. But anyway, a year later, we ended up buying it cash. And all of a sudden now it's like I got one that's got no lien against it. I got the other one that's ginning like a top. And I was going like, this is awesome. I was actually making substantial cash. And that was really when that was my first taste of cash flow, because up to that time I was just thinking all about the big picture. If I bought it for this and I could pay down the mortgage over time, I would have an asset regardless of appreciation. I would have an asset that was paid off. And in my whole mind, it was just that the tenants were paying my freight. They were paying down my mortgage and I was going to have an asset. And that was completely reversed to what I was doing at work with my 401k. Where I was putting in my money, and it was only, I put in a little bit more money, a little bit more money, a little bit more money. And then if the market was a good market, it'd be up, if it's a bad market, you'd still put in and it'd be like a flat line. It's like, well, what about all that money I put in? So that's kind of where I come from, as far as my investing background and kind of my insurance background. So a little bit of my background there.
Yeah,
Wow.
we have so much that we could cover here. I'd love to hear a little bit more about this. So when you were talking about the single family house, when you finally found yourself into cash flow and you found a grant for that, was that turning it into assisted living? Is that what you were doing with this, or?
Yeah, let me give you a little bit more on that. So the It's actually, I want to say it's a mentally handicapped. I can't remember exactly the terminology, but it's a group home for mentally challenged people, and they're essentially adults, but they maybe have the mentality of like a 4 or 5 year old, or maybe 6 or 7 year old, and basically what they need is some sort of supervision. I mean, they're able to bathe themselves and feed themselves. So in Oregon, and I think it's pretty much nationwide as well, there's county funds that are available. I mean, they come from probably the feds down to the state, down to the counties and that. In the area that I was able to do this in, it was kind of almost a rural county, and because what I've tried to duplicate it up here in Portland, and essentially there's a lot of nonprofits that play in that space up here. So and they're more interested in owning the property, operating the property, and providing the care. Whereas my model was I was able to be a landlord and didn't have to provide the care, and the tenant was the care provider. So I was going like, wow, I mean, yeah,
Yes.
I started asking because I remember asking a question, because the first time I was working with them, they said they needed to provide proof of insurance to their landlord. And I was going like, landlord, tell me more about this, and I just asked the county, I said, do you have a need for landlords? And they go, God, yes. And so actually we partnered, the tenant, myself, and the county all submitted a grant for this. There were some development funds, and then there's also some continued operating grants for the tenant. And, so anyway, it's been a very eye-opening experience. In fact, I think one of the things that I share with, on my, website and stuff, there's a worksheet that that I was introduced to, when I was doing this grant, and it actually, I mean, it breaks down all of your costs. I mean, what's the project? Where are you getting your money? What are all the costs involved with developing the property? What are the costs of operating the property? What is the income, to where you can get to that, like, you plug in all the numbers from left to right, and all of a sudden over here you get the number, and you either making money or you're not, and you can then project it out for like 30 years even.
Wow.
And so anyway, that was my indoctrination, and to realize that, holy crap, you don't have to lose money on real estate. You can make money, cash flow, as opposed to wait for it when you sell it, however many years in the future.
Sure.
Wow.
Yeah. I would love to jump back as right in the beginning of this, you basically talked about getting that first property and getting past that state of fear that a lot of people just never get out of.
Sure.
What was able to, it takes a certain bit of mindset. We all go to RIA meetings. We all, network people or talk to people, however, through Bigger Pockets, through Facebook, but people have a grand idea about what they always would love to do, but just that fear, that level of fear never lets them outside the box. What is something that gets you or got you outside the box, or could help other people get started, just to take the step into finding property, maybe putting an offer out, or just even taking that first initial glance at real estate?
Well, it's funny because this property, it was known to me. Whoops, hang on here 1 second. My batteries just went dead here. Hang on 1 second.
No problem. No, I think the quote you said, it was an absolute turd. I actually have that written down here.
Sorry about this.
No problem. No problem. Technology. When were we talking about that earlier?
Yeah. Flintstones.
No matter like how much we think we're George Jetson in the futuristic cartoon.
Can you hear me?
Batteries.
Yeah. It's so funny. I think about that every now and then. It's like, okay, make sure your batteries are good. And got caught. So talking about just the fear, I did know the property, and I knew it was just complete crap hole. I mean, it was absolutely just, essentially it was a house, and it had a garage that was converted into a living space, and it was called a, quote, duplex,
Wow.
And what's really weird is I drove by it the other day. I was actually out in that area, and I drove by, and it's still the same old crappy piece of property, but there's people living there.
Yep.
Yep.
And, the guy that sold it to me, his he had kind of a model. He said, look, the people on the top of the food chain, they can pay cash any day of the week, every day of the week. That's not my client. His was literally the people on the bottom that were not under the bridge, that were basically just, that needed housing, but they didn't have any options, And so what led me through this was, first of all, was kind of solving the riddle. He had offered me a price, and I kept running the numbers. I just couldn't make it work. I was going like, I don't know how, the numbers don't add up. And I can't remember exactly what the rent was. It may have been like $700 a side. So let's just say it was $1,400 was what it was supposed to be. I think it was pretty close to that. And I was looking at it, and I spent all day as like a weekend, just a big yellow tab, and I was running my numbers, my calculator, I was just running. And finally, after doing that for a long time, I realized that, what he really said was, he needed $10,000 to go buy his next property. He didn't need, I forget, I think he offered it to me like $120,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't need the 120. He needed $10,000 so he could go buy this other property. So then I said, well, wait a minute. I've got a line of credit that, I can get $10,000. I don't have $10,000, but I can go get $10,000. And I started working the numbers on what would work, knowing that if I borrowed the 10, what I'd have to pay back, plus then drop that price down. And I started working the numbers. I go, okay, well, wait a minute. If he would accept this amount, and I want to say we settled at like 90 was the kind of price, or I could go back and look at it. But anyway, I did that. And I said, well, I can give you 10 and this. And he goes, okay. It was like, there's no wrestling match, or like, no, that's not, it was like just this like, wait, what? And so then it was again, kind of like, now I've got a deal.
Now you're in it.
Yeah. And so literally went down to the title company, and it was just like a third of a page of paper. It was not like you go to normal closing now, there's like, sign, initial, or anymore now, the DocuSign where it's like you push, click, and it's all done.
Everything's done.
Yeah. It was literally just like a third. It was a note and recorded at the county. He was my lender. Away we went. And then I was using a property management firm that was, I got indoctrinated there, that they got paid first. They took their 10%, I think it was what they were taking. And then I had tenants that were not the best pay. So they were getting late fees, and they were getting paid, first, kind of thing. And it did work. There was, I think, like I said, like in 7 months, I had gone from not being a landlord to having sold my first property. And you asked me, what was the fear? I think more than anything, I was scared to death that the tenants weren't going to pay. Okay. And sure enough, sometimes they didn't pay, but I didn't lose the property. In fact, then they did pay. I'd get like 2 months the next month, or there's some sort of a makeup kind of thing. And I think the other thing too, I was concerned that somehow I would be, I don't know, socially, or there's some sort of like, I was going to have this big interaction with these tenants. You know what I'm saying? That was kind of a thing. And, it didn't happen. In 7 months, I went from, I had more money than I did 7 months before, and I had very little interaction. And I was going like, wow, it really, whatever that I was afraid of, I got through it, and it was more about, I remember when talking to people about real estate, they go, oh God, leaky toilets and, hot water tanks calls in the middle of the night, all that stuff. Never had it happen. Yeah. I can say I've never had it. I've had a frozen pipe, middle of the night, and it was basically told the tenant, hey, go shut the water off.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why you have a management company too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it wasn't, nobody died. Nobody, it was not I've had some, in fact, I just turned over one of our properties to management, and our 12-plex down in Florida, we can talk about that. We've got a management, but we still manage the other 5. And, it's pretty tame stuff. Yeah. It's not, I've had, couple of frozen pipes, and it was more about the property and the way it was plumbed. There's a pipe that's kind of exposed that, wasn't really well thought out. I had a tree limb on the driveway fall onto a tenant's camper or something like that, and that was interesting on vacation getting that call. But
got it. Luckily, we know a good insurance guy, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, they were the ones that told me the limb looked like suspicious, and then sure enough, they left their camper under the limb that looked suspicious. I was like, well, you're calling me all worried about this. Why don't you, get your stuff out from underneath there?
Well, you touched a little bit on Florida. I have in my notes that you just picked up where you have an apartment investment in Florida.
Yeah.
Can you touch upon that?
Yeah. So realizing the cash flow thing and kind of paying attention and kind of the path here, realizing that we wanted to get into something bigger because, leverage in real estate is just amazing to me, that you can get into something bigger and as it appreciates, so does your money, as opposed to that little bit that you contribute into your 401k, right? So my wife and I, her parents live down in Florida. And so we have the occasion to go down and play with the kids on the beach and love Florida. In fact, my wife would love to live in Florida, especially when it's only 63 degrees here in Oregon. But anyway, so, she was all on board. She's going like, let's get an apartment down in Florida. I was like, okay. And as soon as I said that, I mean, God, she was like showing me every opportunity. She was the one that was really kind of bird dogging it and stuff, And so I was like, okay, I've got to make this happen. And so when we were down there, we went and she had met with a couple of commercial brokers down there, and we went down and Florida's kind of an interesting place. And I don't want to say it's any different than elsewhere, but I think there's a lot of non-conforming properties. We ran into, there was a guy that had three, I think they were actually duplexes the way they were put on the plat, but he'd made them into triplexes. And, it was just some sort of a hokey deal there. I mean, they're cute, really cute units. And then there was another property we looked at, and we learned about flood zones. We were talking earlier about flood zones. And so basically I kind of was able to narrow down what it was we wanted. One, we wanted a property that was conforming, not something that was unique and bizarre that we had to be able to explain. That I wanted something people could look at it and go, that's an apartment building.
Yes. You want boring.
Yeah. I just wanted I wanted all of the systems left to right, top to bottom, to be uniform. I didn't want to have the special tool or the special guy to do the special thing to do So that was one. The other thing was I was wanting 20 units. I wanted to get a 20 unit or more, but we ended up with a 12 unit. Did not want to be in a floodplain. I learned about the floodplains because we got all the way down the path on another property, and it was a 4-unit deal. And then you run into all sorts of financing things that were not what I wanted. But it was in a floodplain. And I was just, the flood insurance is not cheap. I'm an insurance broker. I know that, especially if you're at sea level, or even that's not cheap. So as we kind of narrowed our search down, it was, conforming. I wanted it to be block construction in Florida. You've got all sorts of pests and stuff. I didn't want something frame, that you find out that the pests have eaten it all up. I didn't want it to necessarily just be inland in some town that didn't have something going on. I wanted it to be, and it didn't have to be beachfront. I'm not going to live there, kind of thing. But trying to find a community that had something going on was important, and trying to understand that. So last year, we went down to visit my in-laws, and we looked at a couple of properties. And while we were there, we went over to Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center over there. I don't know if you're familiar with that area, but the place was actually decimated when the space shuttle program stopped. It was a thriving place. And then when the space program stopped, it basically regressed, as I understand it, as far as employment and that. And what we were hearing was the SpaceX and Boeing and these companies, these space companies that are committed to going to Mars, is starting to. I mean, there's a lot of launches happening down there, and so there's a growth. It's going in the right direction. The other thing we saw was a healthy cruise ship industry. Port Canaveral down there is a big base for all of your big cruise ships. And I got up one morning to watch the sunrise, and I was like, "Holy crap!" I mean, it's like these great big, huge, multi-story ships just coming and going, in the morning, kind of thing. So anyway, we took note of that. And got back home, and because we'd made an offer on another property on the other side of Florida, it didn't go, and found this one, and it had what we were looking for. It had, wasn't in floodplain. It was uniform in look. It was, there was 6 units up, 6 units down. Had a new roof. It was block construction, and so the first thing I realized was that the property it had a sale that had failed on it, and we were talking with the broker, and the reason was financing. So note to self, the first thing I was going to make certain that we offered, or that when we presented our offer, we had a note from the bank saying, we can get this done.
Yep.
And it didn't qualify for like Fannie Freddie kind of stuff. It wasn't large enough as far as the loan balance goes, but I've had a really good relationship out here with the community bank, and as opposed to if you're going to borrow money for your personal residence, where you've got to go through all the reams of material you have to provide and that kind of deal. You can actually go in and lay out your plan, show them the numbers, make your case for it, provide your financials. And on Tuesday, they'll call you and say, yep, loan committee met, you're good. And so I just got on the phone because I Googled, banks in Melbourne, Florida, and talked to the lady, and she said, oh, the loan guy, he's out, but he'll call you right back. And sure enough, he did. And I just laid it out. I said, here's what it is. And here's who we are. Here's our history. I can give you everything you need. Here's the numbers on the property. And he goes, yeah, send it to me. That sounds really good. And, literally we had that a loan commitment letter from him that they would do it. And then we ran our numbers and made the offer.
There you go. There's a lot of context there. I think
so much. Wow.
Yeah, one of the most important points, I would say, if you have a significant other that maybe is not so far along with you on the investment thing and maybe doesn't buy into your vision, would you find that it helps if you buy properties in areas they want to visit?
In my case, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, good.
It sounds like your wife was partnering up with you.
Yeah, exactly. She was pushing all for it. So
yeah, I had to make her realize we were not going to live there.
That's it.
We got down the path on one that she was like, oh, it's so cool. It's so cool. I'm like, you're not, go look at these. You're not going to live there.
Exactly. And you found it through a broker. How'd you find that broker? Like, how'd you find a deal? How'd you find a broker? How'd you find that, okay, you started focusing on this area because the space program has context of reviving there. You have the port, you have all these drivers that are pushing you there. Well, how'd you get the broker to say, well, these guys are serious?
Yeah. What's kind of funny is, there's LoopNet is kind of like a go-to. And it's kind of funny. People always talk about, that's where deals go to die. And there's probably some truth in that if the brokers present it to their list of known buyers and they balk at it, then, they go to their second list and their third list, and finally they've got to try and sell it's going to go there. But no, this area was more of a, I think my wife found there's like a Zillow link or something like that. It was like,
wow.
So what was really weird was it was presented by like a residential broker. So it was not like a commercial real estate broker listing, and, this was going, my wife was like finding all sorts of nooks and cranny deals, and she was like, rattling all sorts of cages and giving me a laundry list of people I had to call back and, talk to and stuff. And actually, to her credit, I gave her kind of like some basics. I said, okay, look, before you have to be my front end screener on this stuff, and let's, make sure of these things, get the numbers, and gave her a little bit of lingo to where she was able to talk the talk and stuff. And to her credit, she found us. What was funny was she didn't, at first it didn't ring any bells with her, but I did just kind of a Google Earth, kind of got down, on the street, and I was driving around this. I was kind of like, well, I was kind of like, what's wrong with this? Why is, there's nothing wrong with this. Why is this, cause it was, I looked at it and then we did kind of a, Craigslist, just looking to see what were rents going for in the area, and realized this thing was way under market. The guy was paying for cable and water. And, I don't know if you've bought cable for 12 units, but, it was like $800 a month, and the water's, like $500 a month. We just learned about RUBS and, recognized that the marketplace was not providing cable. So we're like, okay, there's two things we can take off the plate, off the expense side of things in a hurry.
Maybe you can explain RUBS. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So help me on this if I say it wrong. I think it's Rational Utility Billing Systems or ratio.
Yeah.
Okay. And it was there's only 1 meter to the property for the water, but there are other landlords in the area that are billing the tenants for water. And so what we basically did was recognize what the average monthly bill was, divided it by the 12 units, and said, going forward, you'll have this much more in rent due for water. So, or it's actually, we call it, you have rent plus water.
So maybe you guys can explain that to us a little bit further for our newer investors listening to this. What do RUBS mean, and what do they mean for your bottom line? I mean, I think anybody listening to this will kind of get it, because you're getting more rental, but compounded, and it being a commercial versus residential. How does that help your bottom line?
Yeah. Well, just in kind of the, you go to the, your net operating income on a financial, and you start with your rents, and then you start taking out your expenses, and your expenses are, insurance, property taxes, property management, utilities in this case. And so any one of those expenses that you can reduce or eliminate is going to improve your net operating income, the rents minus your expenses. And that net operating income is the number that all commercial real estate's valued off of, right? So you take that. So I recognize right away that, first of all, we could pull out cable altogether. And then by eliminating or reducing the water expense, because I still have a little bit of water that I pay for, but it's just because you can't pass on more than what you're being billed for. So there was two ways we could go about it. We could go every month, have it be in a varying number, which my property manager was against, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Or we could just come to a number that made sense based on historical billing. And so that was kind of the rationale and the explanation to the tenants, was that they would now be paying for the water, their portion of the water. And that, by doing that, it's essentially, there's an income that offsets the water expense. Mm-hmm. So that brings that to a zero. That makes sense?
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Yes.
For sure. No, that's great. And if people realize it out there that actually, if you take that now and say you start getting, $10,000 more a month, or maybe throughout the year on a property that size, and then you divide that by the cap rate of the area, if the cap rate's a 10, you may have just added on another $100,000 of value to your property out there, which is huge if you want to put it back in the market and sell it, or even want to go refi out. So that's huge. Congrats.
And then again, I want to explain to people the difference between commercial and residential. Like, a lot of people who are listening to this are going to be, your house flippers who are doing mostly residential. The difference between commercial and residential is that you can and correct me if I'm wrong, you can do simple things like take back the water, take back the cable, like have your tenants pay for all that. And that directly affects the price point of the property.
The value.
The value of the property.
Yeah.
Whereas like with residential, you make your tenants pay for their water. It doesn't affect anything unless you change out the toilets.
And if you go to resell it, the end buyer may not care who's paying the cable. They may just care about the countertops. So
that's the huge difference between commercial and residential when you're looking at the numbers.
Exactly.
Right. Now, I think the thing for me is just recognizing that in residential, your price is what the neighbors are selling their home for.
Yes.
The market, it's whatever the market, that's the comps, whatever the comparables are. Whereas on commercial, you can affect that because we've been able to increase the rent substantially and lower the cost. That net operating income, you divide that back by your cap, and that is the value. So
it's huge. It's huge.
You can increase it by that.
Now that you found this property, you said Melbourne, Florida, is that right? Melbourne?
Yeah, it's actually on one of the barrier islands. So it's just off the coast there, or I guess it's on an island there.
Now that you found that property in Florida, are you guys searching primarily in Florida for more properties, or where do you go from here?
I think that we will probably be doing more in Florida. Right. This is our first multifamily. We were able to do it on our own. We had that one property I told you about. We paid for cash. We, went to my local community bank and was able to take a note against that for our down payment. And, so we have the one in Florida. We are looking actually as kind of a strategy of getting out of our single families up here and rolling them into some more multifamily down there. And
I don't think we've pointed on this. You are actually in Portland when Darrin's talking about up here, he's in Portland and he also invests in Florida. So he's talking about rolling your single families into and becoming more of an apartment investor. Yeah.
No, we were doing kind of the numbers and still even to this date, I mean, we're making a little bit of money, monthly cash flow on these properties, but the by and large, the play on the single families has been equity. And that's kind of an appreciation and paying down the mortgage. And, in the first couple of years, you're not paying much down on the mortgage. It's more about, I've got a couple that they're more of a seasoned loan. I'm getting a lot of calls about refi. And we're like, wait a minute, we're starting to really tack the mortgage on these things. So, but in any case, what we're looking at right now is it's a good time to roll out of or take the equity out of these single families and try and go, find some more multifamilies.
Sure. I think that's a great plan.
Yeah, sounds great. Great. Good luck with it. So what would be something that has happened to you out there that could be a learning lesson on people that maybe a mistake you come about or some correction you've had to make that could be really something that stands out to you? You say, well, man, if I knew this before, I would never do it again. Yeah,
I can answer that real easy. So on this property we bought, we did make some mistakes, and one of which was the seller had, like I said, had been in a contract previous with a sale that failed. And there was an inspection that was done, and it was only a couple of months old. It wasn't like it had been a year old. And I looked at it and I went through it, and we bought multiple properties. So it wasn't like I was, the uninitiated. I was familiar with, things that could go wrong.
Yes.
And so we had, it was a brand new roof. It was like a 1-year-old roof. And what was interesting is actually during our, while we were under contract, there was a hurricane that rolled through there. And so the bank made the suggestion that, you probably should have somebody go and at least inspect the roof, make sure nothing happened, and so we did. We had somebody do that. We went through the inspection. It was basically, it's an older property. It's a Class C property. We weren't looking for, anything high polish and stuff, but basically just some good bones. And, I went through and there was like the, little drips under the sink kind of thing or something that was, talked about. What it suggested was there was like a leaky faucet or something like that kind of thing. And we talked to the plumber and talked about scoping the lines. And we actually had him scope the stacks on from the roof down and out to the street just to make sure that there were not any busted waste lines because I've had to replace those before. And, the rest of it was, it was satisfactory. We've since learned that, a lot of the waste lines in the property are copper, and they've some of them have failed. And so I've gotten to know a plumber in Melbourne, great lady. She's taking good care of me. But in talking with her, in fact, I did an interview with her on my podcast about what we could have done, to find this. And she said, first thing you do is you just turn on all the water and all the receptacles all at the same time, let it run for a few minutes, and see what happens. And it's going, God dang, we could have done that without,
Yeah.
I mean, that would have been real easy. We could have figured out. So we have had a little bit of that. And I think probably the only other thing, and this is all kind of the same conversation. I've talked to other brokers about this, is just kind of the CapEx, accounting for more of an expense on ongoing capital improvements and just maintenance. Probably would have pushed that number up a little bit. But I mean, I've talked with guys, they say, there's a number of, say, like 500 is probably a good number per unit per year. But in a competitive situation, you may only be able to get, 200 a unit or something like that. And so, all things the same. I mean, I don't have any regrets other than the fact that I think I probably would have done that. We did our first rent increase, and the plan was to go by 4 units. So 1 through 4, we're going to get the rent increase this month. Next month was 5 through 8, and then 9 through 12 in the third month. And what happened, because the rents were so low, as soon as the first 4 were given their notice, I would say 6 out of the other remaining 8 came and said, we'll take that, because we were going to try and see what happened to the first 4 and see if we got any pushback. If everybody left, we might realize, and if we had any trouble filling it, we might realize we might have pushed too far, kind of thing. Well, we ended up, we kept everybody except one. I think we're going to have one other that's going to move out, but so there's still room to push the rent some more.
That's great.
But in doing that, I didn't, we were able to operate it this first year without a lot of renovation on the units. When you get a vacancy and you got to go through and whatever you have to do. I mean, a lot of these tenants have been there for a long time. The rents were so low that we didn't really know what was going to happen. So got a good handle on that. We've been through the one renovation. We're going to have another one coming up here, but
amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. That sounds great. And we're going to have to keep us up on how you turn that property out there.
Yeah.
It sounds like you have a ton of room to grow in a number of different directions.
Yeah, no, I would love to.
You come up with.
Yeah, I would love to find something similar, maybe on a little larger scale.
Sure.
Thing. And a lot of it is, I think, what I've learned about you and what you guys did with yours is having the patience and the discipline and not get caught up in it. Like I said, with my wife, we did have that one conversation where she thought we were going to live there, and not there. So
well, now you tell her, well, listen, I saved you from all these plumbing problems, so now you should thank me. So even though we own it, but
yeah. Well, no, I'm excited to find the next one and continue.
Well, since we're talking about the future, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Do you have goals? What's your goals?
It's funny because I was thinking about that this morning, actually. As having my primary occupation as an insurance broker, I was thinking about if I focus more and put more effort into just saying, this is what we're going to be, and this is how many units we want to be at, and this is the number we want to be. I see that being more the case. I mean, because I look at it and go, okay, if we had a net operating income of X, we could do it. I mean, it would be a lot of there's a lot of freedom in that. When you actually have the income coming from that, and if we did want to move to Florida, which I think the big picture is, I've been informed by my wife, we will be in Florida, which I don't have any qualms about. But it's as an insurance broker, it's kind of more of the majority of my clients are here in the Northwest, or based in the Northwest. They have properties all over, but there's still some sort of a local presence. I think it makes sense.
Got it. It's great. It's great. Do you have we like to do a big part being that this is foundations that, the start of your day is a very important impact here. Do you have any special things, special morning rituals or routines that really get you up and going during the day?
I don't know about get me up and going, but I can tell you, I'm probably a little older than you guys. The morning routine of exercise and kind of a little do a daily reading kind of thing, and just some sort of journaling, just some sort of a kind of clear my. I think more than anything, it just gets the noise out of my head, and get it on paper kind of thing, and set some sort of a course for the day. That's probably it. And with that is, keeping focused on the goal. And so, recognizing that we do want to grow, we're feeling good about this property. Now it's time to focus on finding the next one.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Great.
Well, a couple other things. Who are your mentors? We're big on finding your mentors. Yep. So who do you listen to?
Okay. So, having a podcast. I mean, I love, Jake and Gino. I've had those guys on a couple of times. Joe Fairless, I've had him on once before and love his show. Kevin Bupp, I think he's, really good. And then Bigger Pockets. I mean, I love, I've had Brandon on once before and Josh and he do a great job, but I think that it's for me, the audio thing is just it's a real treasure because I can download it. And while I'm in traffic, I don't have to be, bopping out or whatever. I can, hear something. And a lot of it is just staying in the stream of consciousness of what it is I'm trying to do. And it helps me think about, what I'm trying to do and how to do more. And then, like I said, as an insurance broker, a lot of what I learn, I'm able to test it off my real estate clients, or, kind of use them as a sounding board. And so as far as mentors go, I would say I've got a couple of real estate customers that I've had for years that have been really, kind of a mentor of sorts. In fact, on a few on Bigger Pockets, Jay Heinrichs is kind of a known name there.
Yeah.
He's been a client of mine since one of the first days I started selling insurance.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he's definitely a big resource. But just, I would say just like, talking with people that are doing it.
Yeah.
And, when I have something, let them know what I'm doing. And if they start to wrinkle their nose and think that doesn't sound good, then I think I should,
redirect. Yep. Good.
And talk about networking. You're a real estate insurance salesman and you have all these past clients that you can just go,
yeah.
Hello, excuse me. I have this deal.
You have an idea.
Look at it
yeah,
for me?
Exactly. Give me a little
That's
base on it.
amazing.
Good.
Yeah. I think it is, I think there's so much value in talking with people with experience.
Yeah.
Well, before we leave you, do you have any words to live by?
Words to live by. I got a lot of different little sayings here, but I'm trying to think of something that would be useful here. I think, patience is a virtue in this and not to get, or let's say this, pay attention to the numbers, right? I think that's probably a good words is know your numbers, because the numbers don't lie. And, if the other guy isn't able to get those numbers, how are you, if they're not able to get the numbers that you think you're going to get, why are you going to be able to get them kind of thing? So, I have to know your numbers.
Great.
Nice. Patience,
Great.
know your numbers. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. And where can people find you? And of course, tell us the podcast out there so people can check out a little bit more about you and your guests.
You bet. So the podcast, and this is again kind of trying to identify myself with commercial real estate. So the podcast came from, I have a LinkedIn group on LinkedIn, and it's called Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And so from that, the podcast, it's called Commercial Real Estate Pro Network if you go to iTunes, but we also call it CREPN Radio, CREPN Radio.
Got it.
And then I also have a blog, just jdarringross.com. And essentially I post the podcast there as well. But
amazing. Amazing. Well, listen, we really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us and talk to you about your journey, and looking at talking to you more in the future about what you have going on. And we may be calling you with some insurance questions, I'm sure, in the future as well.
Oh, well, hey, thank you guys so much for having me. And we definitely had a good time, and look forward to doing it again.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Darrin.
Thanks, Darrin.
All right. Bye-bye.
Great day. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, everybody. Peely here from the REI Foundation podcast. Looking to rev up your wholesaling or house flipping business? Go now to houseflippinghq.com. Jason and I are part of a house flipping family, a community created by Justin Williams. Would we be where we are without him and without his community and his mentors? Probably not. Justin and his team basically handed us personalized shortcuts and exact strategies that have made us explode in today's market. So if you're looking to take the next step, go to houseflippinghq.com right now. Again, this is Peely from the REI Foundation podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we are so grateful for you. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks for tuning into the REI Foundation podcast. Check back next time for more awesome tips and strategies to launch your new you in real estate.